Edgar Degas was born on July 19, 1834 in Paris. This film tells the story of an artist who made it his life's work to record the bars, cafés, circuses, racecourses, and ballet dancers of the French capital. Degas turned his attentive gaze on these most fleeting and authentic moments of human life. In doing so, he became one of the most original eyes of the 19th century. But how should we read his images? And what of the man behind them? Degas never married. He was famously cold, sharp-tongued, and socially armoured. Yet he spent his life painting women with an almost aching intimacy, their work, their bodies, their private moments. What seems to have captivated Degas more than anything else, whatever his subject, were the informal moments in between events. Those fertile seconds when people can be found waiting, stretching, thinking, washing, sitting, musing, or dreaming. For him, these moments were rich with potential meaning. Degas was born into a family of considerable status and culture. His family's wealth came from banking, with interests stretching from Paris to Naples. His father, Auguste Degas, was a cultivated man who encouraged his son's artistic inclinations from an early age, taking him to the Louvre and filling their home with paintings and music. Degas would carry traces of this privilege throughout his life, especially in his sometimes uneasy relationship with the world outside. At the time of Degas' birth, Paris was, in large part, a medieval city of dark streets and crumbling buildings, a place alive with noise and smell. The city was transformed during Degas' lifetime under the planning of Baron Haussmann. In a huge program of demolition and renewal, the city's heart was replaced with broad, tree-lined boulevards and gleaming apartment facades. In short, this was a time of change, and Degas' art was in no small part informed and inspired by this urban upheaval. Despite coming from banking nobility and receiving a rigorous classical education in Latin and Greek, his keen eye for the working classes, who were the most affected by the changing face of Paris, only sharpened with age. In his early 20s, Degas did what most children of cultivated European families had done for centuries. He went travelling. Between the ages of roughly 21 and 25, he took extended trips to the south of France and Italy, staying with relatives and immersing himself for nearly 2.5 years in the artistic riches of Florence, Rome, and Naples. He was an assiduous student. His notebooks from this period are extraordinary documents. Page after page shows sketches of statues, buildings, church frescoes, and old master paintings. He copied works by Giotto, Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Titian. In Rome, he attended evening drawing classes at the Villa Medici and made copies of paintings in the Vatican museums. His excitement is palpable in his letters. They offer a portrait of a young man reveling in the artistic riches of southern Europe. One friendship made during these Italian years would prove especially significant. In Rome, Degas encountered the symbolist painter Gustave Moreau. 8 years his senior, already established, a figure of brooding imagination. The two became close companions, spending days discussing art from antiquity to the present and exchanging many letters. Thanks to Moreau's influence, Degas' early paintings from around this time, such as Young Woman with Ibis, probably begun during his second trip to Rome in the late 1850s, show a leaning towards the delights of exoticism and colour. But Degas would soon be ready to find his own style. Degas returned to Paris in 1859 and began to paint in earnest. His earliest mature works were ambitious historical canvases that look back to the French neoclassical masters like Poussin and Ingres. He submitted his first work to the Paris Salon in 1865 and was accepted. Over 6 consecutive years, only one submission was turned away. In 1862, at the Louvre, Degas made an important acquaintance. Whilst bent over a copper plate, carefully copying a painting by Velázquez, he was tapped on the shoulder. It was the painter Edouard Manet, dapper, sociable, confident, and they became close friends almost immediately. Their friendship was unlikely in some ways. Manet was gregarious and held Republican sympathies. Degas was elitist, sharp-tongued, privately aristocratic in his instincts. But it was Manet's example of painting directly, with frankness, stripping away the pretensions of academic art, that brought about a change in Degas' style. Slowly at first, then decisively, his historical canvases gave way to something altogether more immediate. He looked outwards, making modern life his subject matter. He began to paint racehorses and their jockeys, and in 1866 he submitted to the Salon a large canvas showing a jockey thrown from his horse during a steeplechase. Not a moment of triumph, but of failure, of sprawling, undignified impact. It was accepted, but Degas was not satisfied with it and would return to rework the canvas at least twice over the following decades. It began a new mode of painting for Degas, that of a moment in time caught in paint. To this end, he began to experiment with unusual cropping methods to suggest a fleeting glimpse of city life. He painted orchestra musicians with the tops of their heads just visible above the stage, or dancers' legs cutting across the upper frame. As the 1870s arrived, one subject above all others began to hold Degas in its grip: the ballet at the Paris Opéra, and with it access to a world of extraordinary visual diversity. A friend who visited him at the dancers' rehearsals later noted that Degas arrived in the morning and watched all the exercises in which movements were broken down and analysed through drawing. Nothing in the most complicated step escaped his gaze. Behind the ballet spectacle lay a harsh reality. Girls as young as 8 years old, working up to 12 hours a day, sometimes 6 or 7 days a week. Degas' representations occasionally captured this more complex side: fatigue, distraction, and the mechanical repetition of bodies trained to the point of exhaustion. His scrutiny of the lives of these young women would, in his own time as well as today, raise questions about his own private motivations. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 interrupted Degas' life along with everyone else's. Degas enlisted in the artillery and was posted to the city's northern fortifications. A close friend, the sculptor Joseph Cuvelier, was killed in the fighting. Degas himself, whose eyesight had never been strong, found the gunpowder-filled conditions worsened his vision noticeably. It was a deterioration that would shadow him for the rest of his life, and eventually, in old age, leave him almost blind. For a time after the war, Degas spent several months in New Orleans, in America, visiting relatives. He painted the family's cotton business in a large, airy canvas, one of his most unusual and striking works. It shows the interior of his uncle's cotton exchange in New Orleans. Family members and other associates are shown across the image in a beautifully distributed array of activity, while a cloud of raw cotton is spread on a table in the middle of the office. The painting demonstrates his growing mastery of the artist's core demands: composition, depiction, and atmosphere. When he returned to Paris, Degas found that his brother René had fallen deeply into debt. Following their father's death, shortly after, he was compelled to sell the family home and their art collection to settle the obligations. He was now, for the first time, dependent on the sale of his paintings to live. Meanwhile, the ballet continued to be an almost endless source of inspiration. In 1874, he completed The Dance Class, one of his most ambitious paintings, commissioned by the opera baritone Jean-Baptiste Fauré. The scene is a large rehearsal room filled with dancers in various states of attention and inattention. At the centre, the ballet master, Jules Perrault, leans on his stick, surveying his charges. Degas fills the canvas with a complex variety of postures: figures seen from the front, the side, the rear, the back turned, the head bent, the arm raised. There is a proto-cubist quality to the work, as if the subject of a dancer had been examined from every possible angle simultaneously and reassembled into a single image. In 1874, the year of the dance class, a group of artists, including Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, and Sisley, mounted an independent exhibition outside the official salon, what history would come to call the first Impressionist exhibition. Degas was one of its driving organizers and one of its most vocal advocates. He was particularly insistent that women artists be included. He wrote to the mother of Berthe Morisot, pressing her to allow her daughter to join, and that the exhibition perfectly suited her talent. He also argued loudly for the inclusion of Marie Bracquemond on the publicity posters. When the organizer resisted, Degas dismissed the position as idiotic. The exhibition went ahead, and Degas showed at least 10 of his works, one of which was The Dancing Class of 1871. Another was The False Start, completed by Degas in about 1872, which depicts a lively moment at a horse race, lightly set at the Longchamp racetrack, located on the western edge of Paris. Adopting a vantage point directly on the track, the painting captures both the impulsive energy of the races and the social spectacle surrounding the event. And yet, despite Degas' visibility in the Impressionist exhibition, he remains somewhat suspicious of the Impressionist label with its implication of spontaneity, since he considered himself a planner, a painstaking student of form. As he wrote, "No art was ever less spontaneous than mine. What I do is the result of reflection and the study of the great masters. Of inspiration, spontaneity, temperament, I know nothing." Around 1875, Degas painted a canvas that would become one of his most celebrated and controversial works. As an avid portraitist, he was adept at capturing the psychological bearing of his sitters, but this painting went further. Two figures sit in a cafe. The woman stares blankly downward. A man beside her, pipe in his lips, gazes at something beyond the canvas edge. Between them, on a marble table, sits a glass of cloudy green liquid, absinthe. Dans un café was exhibited in London in 1893, and it caused a minor scandal. Critics called it loathsome and sordid. What they were really objecting to, perhaps, was the painting's refusal to soften or redeem its subjects. The couple are not victims or heroes. They simply are, caught in a moment of exhausted disconnection, pressed against the hard geometry of the modern café, the marble and mirror and sharp angles of a city that, under Baron Haussmann's renovations, had moved on without them. By the 1880s, Degas had found his domain. Ballet dancers occupied him with an almost obsessive consistency. Nearly half of all his oil paintings and pastel works would, by the end of his life, depict figures from the ballet. But it was not, he insisted, the graceful spectacle that drew him. "People call me a painter of dancing girls," he said. "It has never occurred to them that my chief interest in dancers lies in rendering movement and painting pretty clothes." He had begun to work increasingly in pastel, a medium perfectly suited to his interests, its chalky, layered textures capable of capturing the shimmer of gauze, the bloom of skin, the electric quality of gaslit colour. He worked from memory and from photographs, and from endless accumulated sketches. With growing freedom, he combined media, layering oil and pastel and watercolour in the same work, sometimes adding strips of paper to expand compositions as they evolved. During these years, he produced some of the most accomplished and virtuoso paintings of his whole career. Degas had, by most accounts, a complicated relationship with the women he depicted. His remarks about women could be, by any measure, contemptible. He once called women ugly, and in later life confessed, "I have perhaps too often considered woman as an animal." And yet, when one looks at the tender quality of his images and his vast correspondence of letters, the picture becomes more complicated. Many women counted Degas as a friend, and for him, they played a vital role in his life, both socially and intellectually. He was capable of genuine advocacy for fellow female painters, even if it meant falling out of favour with his male counterparts. Moreover, Degas was a well-known conversationalist who revelled in repartee, taking pleasure in the verbal one-upmanship and quick-witted, sometimes outrageous remarks. Might this explain his apparent callousness? The painter Berthe Morisot, who was informed that Degas was shy around women, once described him as a little mad, but his wit is delightful. Degas' later years were marked by a gradual withdrawal from public exhibitions, as he found regular sales through his principal dealer, Paul Durand-Ruel. His work continued to explore layers of textured colour and compositions with unusual viewpoints. With prosperity, he took up travelling again, to Naples, Madrid and Morocco. He also purchased art by his contemporaries and by his favourite classical painter, Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. A photo from 1885 shows Degas' fondness for Ingres. While staying with friends in Dieppe, he composed this playful image and called it the Apotheosis of Degas, a parody of the famous Ingres masterpiece, the Apotheosis of Homer. Degas sent copies to friends, no doubt taking great pleasure in being able to link himself with the neoclassical master. With age, as his eyesight dimmed, Degas turned to larger works, among them the monumental Combing the Hair from 1896, which uses a great swathe of blended orange and white tones to blanket the entire canvas, merging background and foreground into one glowing, almost humming interplay of shapes. He also made sculpture, working with his hands in wax what his eyes could no longer fully register in paint. In one letter he describes himself as a blind man who wants to pretend he can see. Many of his wax sculptures, later cast in bronze, were found after his death in a state of partial collapse. Figures of dancers, bathers, horses caught in mid-movement, monumental in their ambition. As he aged, he grew more isolated, though he kept around him a close circle of friends. Degas died in Paris on September the 27th, 1917, at the age of 83. One of the last survivors of the great Impressionist generation. His funeral was modest, passing almost unnoticed in the shadow of the Great War. His studio was found to contain thousands of works that he had never sold. Some had been cut apart and reworked, some were damaged, all of them bore the marks of a ceaseless, unresolved looking. Edgar Degas did not change painting by inventing a new theory. He changed it by looking harder, longer, and more honestly than almost anyone else of his time, at a woman waiting, a dancer resting, at a couple sitting in silence in a cafe. In these moments of apparent stillness, he found something inexhaustible. He showed us that the most ordinary scenes, caught in the right light, at the right angle, with the right quality of attention, contain depths we might otherwise never stop to see. His most famous aphorism sums up his legacy perfectly. Art is not what one sees, but what one can make others see.